The sharp crack of a hand slapping the worn wooden counter echoed through the dusty general store in Deeming, New Mexico. And Adelaide Zimmerman froze with her fingers still wrapped around the loaf of bread she had been trying to slip into her coat pocket. Her heart hammered against her ribs as every eye in the establishment turned toward her, and she felt the heat of shame crawl up her neck, despite the November chill that seeped through the walls. It was 1878, and the unforgiving desert town showed no mercy to those who fell on hard times, especially young women with no family and no prospects. "Thief!" Mrs. Henderson shrieked, her plump face turning an alarming shade of crimson as she pointed an accusatory finger at Adelaide. "I knew something was off about you the moment you walked in here looking all sorry for yourself. Thought you could take advantage of my kind heart, did you?" Adelaide's throat constricted, and she struggled to find words that would not come. The bread felt like a stone in her hand now, its weight a testament to her desperation. She had not eaten in 2 days, not since the boarding house had thrown her out for being unable to pay rent after the seamstress shop where she worked had closed without warning. At 21 years old, she had thought herself capable of making her own way in the world after leaving St. Louis 6 months prior, but the West had proven far harsher than she had imagined. "Please," Adelaide finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can pay you back. I just need a few days to find work, and I will bring you every cent I owe." Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed into slits. "You think I am a fool? Girls like you are all the same, coming out here with your fancy city airs and thinking the world owes you something. Well, it does not. I have half a mind to fetch the sheriff and have you locked up where you belong." The other customers murmured among themselves, some with pity in their eyes but most with the cold indifference of people who had their own troubles to worry about. Adelaide felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing her break, even if her stomach twisted with hunger, and her future looked bleaker than the desert landscape surrounding this God-forsaken town. The bell above the door chimed, and a gust of cool air swept through the store along with the massive frame of a man who had to duck slightly to clear the doorway. Adelaide caught her breath at the sight of him, not out of fear but out of sheer astonishment at his presence. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sunlight streaming through the windows. His hair, dark as a raven's wing, and falling past his collar in waves that suggested he had not seen a proper barber in months, framed a face that was all hard angles and weathered bronze skin. His buckskin jacket strained across a chest that spoke of years spent doing hard labor in the mountains, and his arms, visible where his sleeves were rolled up despite the cold, were corded with muscle that rippled with his slightest movement. He surveyed the scene with eyes the color of storm clouds, taking in Adelaide's terrified expression, the bread still clutched in her trembling hands, and Mrs. Henderson's self-righteous fury. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, like thunder rolling across distant peaks. "What is the trouble here?" Mrs. Henderson straightened, clearly ready to launch into her grievances. "This girl was caught stealing from my establishment, Mr. Ashford. I was just about to send someone for the sheriff." The man called Ashford turned his full attention to Adelaide, and she felt pinned in place by the intensity of his gaze. She expected to see disgust or condemnation there, but instead found something else entirely, something that looked almost like understanding. He studied her for a long moment, noting the hollowness of her cheeks, the worn state of her dress beneath her inadequate coat, and the desperate pride that kept her spine straight despite her circumstances. "How much does she owe you?" he asked without taking his eyes off Adelaide. Mrs. Henderson blinked, thrown off balance by the question. Well, that loaf is 20 cents, but that is hardly the point. It is the principle of the thing. We cannot have people just taking whatever they please. Ashford reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. He counted out money onto the counter with deliberate precision, far more than 20 cents. There is $5. That should cover the bread and a week's worth of provisions for the lady. The store fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall and the soft whistle of wind through the eaves. Adelaide stared at the mountain man in shock, unable to comprehend why a complete stranger would do such a thing for her. Mrs. Henderson looked equally stunned, but recovered quickly enough to scoop up the coins and tuck them into her apron with a sniff of disapproval. "Well, I suppose that settles the matter then," the shopkeeper said grudgingly, "though I still say she should not be rewarded for attempted theft." Ashford's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The lady looks like she has not had a proper meal in days. Seems to me hunger drove her to desperation, not criminal intent. Now, are you going to help her select those provisions, or do I need to take my business elsewhere?" "I was planning to stock up for winter myself, which would have been a considerable order, but I can just as easily ride to Silver City if your Christian charity does not extend to those who have fallen on hard times." The threat of losing such a lucrative customer clearly struck a nerve, and Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted from righteous indignation to calculating hospitality in the span of a heartbeat. Of course, I am happy to help. What would you like, Miss Zimmerman?" Adelaide supplied softly, finding her voice at last. "Adelaide Zimmerman." She turned to look at the man who had just saved her from jail or worse, searching for the right words to express her gratitude. "Sir, I do not know how to thank you. I will find a way to repay you, I swear it." Ashford shook his head, a ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "No need for that. Just make sure you eat something, and maybe we can talk about how you ended up in such a situation. My name is Fletcher Ashford, and I have a cabin up in the Borough Mountains. I come down to town for supplies every few weeks, and I could use someone to help with some tasks that I am frankly not very good at. If you are willing to work, I might have a proposition for you." Adelaide's first instinct was to be wary. She had heard stories of what happened to young women who went off into the wilderness with strange men, and she was not naive enough to think that all offers of help came without strings attached. But as she looked into Fletcher Ashford's steady gray eyes, she saw no hint of the predatory gleam she had learned to recognize in her months of struggling alone. Instead, she saw only a quiet strength and a genuine concern that made her want to trust him despite her better judgment. "What kind of tasks?" she asked cautiously. "Mending, mostly. Sewing. Maybe some cooking if you know how. I can hunt and trap well enough, but I am terrible at making the meat last or preparing it in any way that does not involve burning it over an open fire. My clothes are falling apart because I cannot sew worth a damn, and my cabin could use a woman's touch when it comes to organization. I would pay fair wages, and you would have your own space. I am not looking for anything improper, Miss Zimmerman. I am just a man who could use some help and figured you might need the work." The offer was almost too good to be true, which made Adelaide's natural suspicion flare even stronger. But what choice did she have? She could stay in Deeming and likely starve or freeze before finding legitimate work, or she could take a chance on this mountain man and hope that his offer was as straightforward as it seemed. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat impatiently, and Fletcher gestured toward the shelves. "Go ahead and pick out what you need. Food that will keep you going for a week. Do not be shy about it." For the next 20 minutes, Adelaide moved through the store in a daze, selecting items with Mrs. Henderson's grudging assistance. Flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, dried apples, and a small tin of lard. The shopkeeper wrapped everything in brown paper and tied it with string, her movements efficient despite her obvious disapproval of the entire situation. Fletcher added his own supplies to the order, enough to feed a small army through the winter, and paid for everything without batting an eye. When they finally stepped out into the bright November sunlight, Adelaide clutched her parcel to her chest like a lifeline. The main street of Deeming stretched before them, a dusty thoroughfare lined with false-fronted buildings that looked tired and worn despite the town's relative youth. A few people moved about their business, casting curious glances at the unlikely pair standing outside the general store. Fletcher's horse, a massive roan gelding that matched its owner's impressive size, stood patiently at the hitching post. He loaded his supplies into the saddlebags with practiced ease before turning to Adelaide. "I have a few more errands to run before I head back up to the cabin. There is a boarding house just down the street run by a woman named Mrs. Garcia. She is fair and honest, unlike some folks in this town. Why not you take your provisions there and get yourself a room for the night? Have a proper meal and a good sleep, and meet me back here at first light tomorrow. That will give you time to think about my offer without feeling pressured. If you decide you would rather take your chances in town, I will understand, but the offer stands if you want it." Adelaide nodded slowly, still processing the sudden turn her fortunes had taken. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me at all." Fletcher was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the mountains that rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. "Let us just say I know what it is like to be down on your luck with nowhere to turn. Someone gave me a chance once when I needed it most, and I figure it is only right to pass that kindness along when I can. Besides, I really do need the help, Miss Zimmerman. I am not being entirely altruistic here." Before Adelaide could respond, he pressed some additional coins into her hand, enough to cover a room and meals at the boarding house. "I will see you in the morning if you decide to come. No judgment either way." He swung up into his saddle with the fluid grace of a man who spent more time on horseback than on his feet, and with a slight tip of his hat, he guided his horse down the street toward the blacksmith shop. Adelaide watched him go, her mind whirling with questions and possibilities. The weight of the coins in her palm felt both comforting and terrifying, a tangible reminder that her life had just taken an unexpected turn. She made her way to Mrs. Garcia's boarding house, a modest but well-kept establishment with cheerful yellow curtains in the windows. The proprietor, a woman in her 50s with kind brown eyes and silver threading through her dark hair, welcomed Adelaide without the suspicion or judgment she had come to expect. After settling into a small but clean room on the second floor, Adelaide sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself to truly feel the events of the day. She had come so close to being arrested, to having her name dragged through the mud and her future destroyed before it had truly begun. And then Fletcher Ashford had appeared like something out of a storybook, a hero riding to her rescue without even being asked. It seemed impossible, the kind of thing that happened in the dime novels she used to read back in St. Louis, not in real life where people were selfish and cruel and only looked out for themselves. But the bread she ate that evening, fresh and warm from Mrs. Garcia's kitchen, was very real. The soft mattress beneath her that night was real. And the decision she faced come morning was all too real as well. Adelaide lay awake for a long time, watching moonlight paint silver patterns on the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the town settling in for the night. She thought about her mother, who had died when Adelaide was 16, and her father, who had followed 2 years later, leaving her alone in the world with nothing but a small inheritance that had run out far too quickly. She thought about the dreams that had brought her west, the naive belief that she could reinvent herself in a place where no one knew her history or her mistakes. She thought about Fletcher Ashford, with his broad shoulders and careful eyes, and wondered what kind of man lived alone in the mountains by choice. Was he running from something, as she was? Or had he simply found peace in solitude that civilization could not offer? The questions multiplied in her mind, but beneath them all ran a single thread of certainty that she could not quite explain or ignore. She trusted him. Despite every lesson she had learned about the dangers of trusting strangers, despite her mother's warnings and her own hard-won experience, she believed that Fletcher Ashford was exactly what he appeared to be, a good man offering help to someone in need. When dawn broke over Deeming in shades of pink and gold, Adelaide was already awake and dressed in her cleanest clothes. She had washed her face and hands in the basin, pinned her brown hair back as neatly as she could manage, and packed her meager belongings into the small carpet bag that held everything she owned in the world. Mrs. Garcia insisted on feeding her a hearty breakfast of eggs and tortillas, refusing to take no for an answer, and by the time Adelaide made her way back to the general store, she felt more like herself than she had in weeks. Fletcher was already there, his horse saddled and ready, along with a smaller mare with a gentle eye and a coat the color of honey. He looked up as Adelaide approached, and something that might have been relief flickered across his features. "I was not entirely sure you would come," he admitted. "Neither was I," Adelaide confessed, "but I do not have many options, and you seem like a decent man. I am willing to work hard, Mr. Ashford. I promise you will not regret giving me this chance." "I am sure I would not, and please call me Fletcher. We will be spending enough time together that formality seems unnecessary." He gestured to the mare. "This is Daisy. She is a good, steady horse and will not give you any trouble. Have you ridden much?" "Some when I was younger. It has been a few years, though. It will come back to you." "The cabin is about a 3-hour ride from here, higher up into the mountains. The trail can be rough in places, but we will take it slow." Fletcher helped her secure her bag to the saddle before giving her a boost up onto Daisy's back. The mare shifted slightly but remained calm, and Adelaide felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement as she settled into the saddle. They rode out of Deeming as the town was coming to life, shopkeepers opening their doors and early morning customers beginning their rounds. Adelaide did not look back. Whatever lay ahead in the mountains had to be better than what she was leaving behind, and for the first time in months, she felt something that resembled hope stirring in her chest. The landscape changed as they climbed, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills studded with juniper and pinon pine. The air grew cooler and thinner, carrying the sharp scent of sage and the promise of winter. Fletcher rode ahead, occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning her about tricky sections of the trail, but for the most part, they traveled in comfortable silence. Adelaide found herself watching him when she thought he would not notice, observing the easy confidence with which he moved, the way he seemed to be part of the landscape, rather than merely passing through it. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked when they stopped to water the horses at a small spring. 5 years, give or take. I came west after the war, spent some time drifting around, working various jobs. Prospecting, ranch work, a stint as a scout for the army. Nothing really stuck until I found that cabin. Previous owner had died, and his family back east did not want anything to do with it, so I was able to buy it for next to nothing. Fixed it up, made it livable, and I have been there ever since. You get lonely?" Fletcher considered the question as he knelt beside the spring, cupping water in his hands to drink. "Sometimes, but I spent enough years surrounded by people during the war to appreciate solitude. There is a peace up here that I never found anywhere else. That said, it would be nice to have someone to talk to now and then besides my horses. They continued on, the trail growing steeper and more challenging. Adelaide's thighs began to ache from the unfamiliar exercise, but she gritted her teeth and kept pace. She had told Fletcher she was willing to work hard, and she meant it. Complaining about a little discomfort would be a poor way to start. When the cabin finally came into view, Adelaide felt her breath catch despite her exhaustion. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines, their branches heavy with green needles that whispered in the breeze. The structure itself was solid and well built, constructed from logs that had weathered to a silvery gray. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, suggesting Fletcher had banked a fire before leaving, and a small porch stretched across the front, complete with a rocking chair and a stack of firewood. "It is not much," Fletcher said, swinging down from his horse, "but it is home." Adelaide dismounted with considerably less grace, her legs nearly buckling when her feet hit the ground. Fletcher was there in an instant, steadying her with a gentle hand on her elbow until she found her balance. "Sorry," she said, embarrassed by her weakness. "I am out of practice." "You will get used to it. Come on, let me show you around before you collapse." The interior of the cabin was larger than it had appeared from outside, consisting of a main room with a stone fireplace, a small sleeping loft accessible by a ladder, and a separate room that Fletcher explained would be hers. The furniture was simple but well made, clearly crafted by someone who knew their way around woodworking. Furs covered the floor and the bed in the main room, and the walls were hung with various tools and implements of mountain living. "I usually sleep up there," Fletcher said, pointing to the loft. "But I cleaned out the back room for you. It has a proper bed and a door that locks from the inside. I want you to feel safe here, Adelaide. This arrangement only works if we both trust each other." The room he showed her was modest but private, containing a narrow bed covered with a heavy quilt, a small dresser, and a washstand. A single window looked out over the forest, offering a view that would have cost a fortune in any city. Adelaide set down her carpetbag and turned to face Fletcher, overwhelmed by the sudden reality of her situation. "I still cannot believe this is happening," she said softly. "Yesterday I was about to be arrested, and today I am standing in a cabin in the mountains with a stranger who saved me from jail and offered me a job. It feels like a dream." Fletcher leaned against the door frame, his expression thoughtful. "I know it is a lot to take in. If you need time to adjust, just say so. We can start the work slowly. For today, why do not you just rest and get familiar with the place? I need to check my trap lines, but I will be back before dark. There is food in the larder and the fire should keep the main room warm. Make yourself at home." He left her alone then, and Adelaide heard him moving around the main room, gathering supplies for his trek into the forest. The front door opened and closed, and then there was only silence broken by the occasional pop and crackle of the fire. She sat on the edge of her new bed, running her hands over the quilt's careful stitching, and allowed herself to feel the full weight of relief that comes with finding shelter after being lost in the storm. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Adelaide with its comfort. She woke each morning to the sound of Fletcher moving around the cabin, stoking the fire and preparing coffee. They would eat breakfast together, simple fare of biscuits and whatever meat Fletcher had hunted or trapped, and then he would head out to check his lines while Adelaide set to work on the tasks he had mentioned. The pile of clothes needing mending was truly impressive, speaking to years of neglect. Adelaide spent hours with needle and thread, patching holes, reattaching buttons, and reinforcing seams that had given way under the strain of hard use. She found a strange satisfaction in the work, in taking something broken and making it whole again. While her hands were busy, her mind was free to wander, processing her new circumstances and the man who had brought her to this place. Fletcher was unlike anyone she had ever met. He moved through the world with a quiet confidence that came not from arrogance but from genuine competence. He could track a deer through snow without breaking stride, split logs with an axe like he was cutting butter, and read the weather with an accuracy that seemed almost supernatural. But he was also surprisingly gentle, treating his horses with affection and showing Adelaide endless patience as she learned the routines of mountain life. They talked in the evenings, sitting by the fire after supper was cleared away. Adelaide learned that Fletcher had grown up on a farm in Virginia, the youngest of 4 brothers. All of them had fought for the Confederacy, and only Fletcher had survived, carrying scars both physical and emotional that he rarely spoke about directly. He had come west to escape the memories, to find a place where the past could not reach him, and he had mostly succeeded. Adelaide shared her own story in bits and pieces, explaining how her parents' deaths had left her adrift, how she had thought coming west would give her a fresh start, and how naive she had been about the realities of frontier life. Fletcher listened without judgment, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight, and Adelaide found herself saying things she had never told another soul. "I was so angry at first," she confessed one night, weeks into her stay at the cabin. "Angry at my parents for dying and leaving me alone, angry at the world for being so much harder than I thought it would be. I felt like everyone else knew some secret about how to survive, and I had been left out of the lesson." "It is not a secret," Fletcher said quietly. "It is just luck and timing. You happen to have bad luck and bad timing, and that is not your fault, but your luck has changed now. You are doing good work here, Adelaide, better than I expected, honestly. The place has never been so organized or comfortable." His praise warmed her in ways she had not anticipated, and she found herself looking forward to their evening conversations with an eagerness that had nothing to do with gratitude, and everything to do with genuine enjoyment of his company. Fletcher was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh in ways she had almost forgotten how to do. The first snow came in early December, transforming the landscape overnight into a wonderland of white and silver. Adelaide woke to find the world outside her window completely changed. The pines bowed under the weight of fresh powder and the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. Fletcher was already up, shoveling a path from the cabin to the woodshed, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. She dressed quickly and joined him outside, gasping at the cold that bit through her layers of clothing. "It is beautiful," she said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "It is deadly if you are not prepared for it," Fletcher replied, but there was no harshness in his tone. "Winter up here is not like winter in town. We could get snowed in for days or even weeks at a time. That is why I stocked up so heavily before bringing you here. I need to know you understand the risks, Adelaide. If something happens to me, if I get hurt or sick, you would be on your own until the snow melts enough for you to ride down to Deeming. It is not a situation to take lightly." "I understand," Adelaide said, meeting his gaze steadily. "And I am not afraid. You have taught me well, Fletcher. I know how to keep the fire going, how to ration the supplies, how to care for the horses. I would find a way to manage if I had to." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes that made her heart skip. "I believe you would. You are tougher than you look, Adelaide Zimmerman." As winter deepened, the cabin became a world unto itself, isolated from everything beyond the mountain. The snow piled higher, covering the windowsills and muffling all sound except the wind in the pines and the crack of branches under the weight of ice. Adelaide and Fletcher worked together to maintain their small domain, chopping wood, melting snow for water, and rationing their supplies with careful precision. The close quarters forced an intimacy that Adelaide had not anticipated. She became acutely aware of Fletcher's presence in ways that had nothing to do with practicality, and everything to do with the quickening of her pulse when he entered a room. She noticed the way his hair curled at his collar when it was damp from melted snow, the way his hands, so large and capable, could be surprisingly delicate when handling small tasks. She caught herself watching him when he thought she was focused on her sewing, admiring the play of muscles beneath his shirt as he worked, and more than once their eyes met across the fire with a charge of awareness that left her breathless. Fletcher seemed equally affected, though he maintained a respectful distance that Adelaide both appreciated and found frustrating. He never touched her unnecessarily, never gave her cause to doubt his earlier promise that nothing improper would occur, but she saw the way his gaze lingered on her when he thought she was not looking. She felt the tension that hummed between them like a plucked string, growing stronger with each passing day. The breaking point came during a blizzard that raged for 3 days straight, trapping them inside with nothing to do but keep the fire fed and wait out the storm. On the third night, unable to sleep for the howling wind and the restless energy that seemed to fill the cabin, Adelaide came out of her room to find Fletcher sitting by the dying fire, his expression distant and troubled. "Could not sleep either?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. "Too much noise in my head," he admitted. "Sorry if I woke you." "You did not. I have been lying awake for hours." Adelaide hesitated, then plunged forward with the question that had been building in her mind for weeks. "Fletcher, why did you really help me that day in town? And do not tell me it was just because you needed someone to mend your clothes. You could have hired any number of women in Deeming for that." He was quiet for so long that Adelaide thought he might not answer. The fire crackled and popped, casting shadows that danced across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the faint scar that ran from his temple to his cheekbone. "I saw myself in you," he finally said. "That look you had, like you were barely holding on but refusing to break. I had that same look after the war, when I was drifting from place to place with no purpose and no hope. A man named Thomas gave me work on his ranch outside of Tucson, no questions asked, even though I was half wild and more than a little dangerous. He fed me, gave me a place to sleep, and treated me like I was worth something even though I did not believe it myself. He saved my life, Adelaide. Not in a dramatic way, but in all the small ways that actually matter. When I saw you in that store, desperate and scared but still proud, I thought maybe I could do for you what Thomas did for me." Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by his honesty. "Where is Thomas now? Died 2 years ago. Heart gave out while he was mending a fence. I went to his funeral, met his family, tried to tell them what he had meant to me. They were good people, but I do not think they fully understood. How could they? They had never been as lost as I was." Fletcher leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and looked at Adelaide with an intensity that made her breath catch. "But there is more to it than that. When I saw you, something just clicked into place. I cannot explain it better than that. It felt right to help you, like it was what I was supposed to do." "I am glad you did," Adelaide whispered. "I do not know what would have happened to me if you had not been there. Nothing good, that is certain, Adelaide." The way he said her name, soft and rough all at once, sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "I need to tell you something, and I want you to know there is no pressure behind it. You are free to stay here as long as you need. regardless of how you respond to what I am about to say." Her heart was pounding now, so loud she was sure he must be able to hear it. "What is it?" "I have feelings for you. Strong feelings that go beyond friendship or simple companionship. I think I have had them since that first day, if I am being honest. You are brave and kind and strong, and when you smile, which you are doing more and more these days, it is like the sun coming out. I know I am just a rough mountain man with nothing much to offer except this cabin and a hard life, but if you felt even a fraction of what I feel, I would count myself the luckiest man alive." The confession hung in the air between them, huge and fragile as a soap bubble. Adelaide felt her world tilt and resettle into a new configuration, one where all the small moments of the past months suddenly made perfect sense. The way her heart lifted when she heard Fletcher's step on the porch. The way she had started paying more attention to her appearance, pinning her hair more carefully and wishing she had prettier dresses. The way she had begun to think of the cabin not as a temporary refuge but as home. "Fletcher," she said, and her voice shook with the weight of what she was about to reveal. "I feel the same way. I have been trying not to because I thought it would complicate things, but I cannot help it. When I am with you, I feel safe and seen and valued in ways I never have before. You make me want to be braver, to be better. I think I might be falling in love with you." The smile that broke across Fletcher's face was like nothing Adelaide had ever seen from him, transforming his usually serious features into something boyish and luminous. He stood and crossed the small distance between them in 2 strides, kneeling beside her chair so their eyes were level. "Say that again," he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I am falling in love with you, Fletcher Ashford." He reached up and cupped her face in his calloused hands, his touch so gentle it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "I am falling in love with you too, Adelaide Zimmerman. Have been since the moment you looked at me with those fierce eyes and refused to cry even though you were terrified. May I kiss you?" "Yes," she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, warm and sure and perfect. The kiss started tentatively, a question being asked and answered, but quickly deepened into something more urgent. Adelaide had been kissed before, fumbling encounters with boys back in St. Louis that had left her underwhelmed and confused about what all the fuss was about. This was nothing like those awkward exchanges. Fletcher kissed her like she was precious and necessary, like he had been waiting his whole life for this moment and was determined to make it count. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adelaide felt dizzy with want and wonder. Fletcher pressed his forehead to hers, his hand still cradling her face, and laughed softly. "I have been wanting to do that for so long," he confessed. "I wish you had done it sooner. I did not want to rush you, did not want you to feel obligated because I had helped you." Adelaide pulled back enough to meet his eyes, her expression serious. "Fletcher, I do not feel obligated. I feel grateful, yes, but that is not why I am here right now. I am here because you are a good man and I trust you and I want to see where this goes between us. Do you believe me?" "I believe you." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a question. "But we should probably take this slow. I do not want to do anything that might make you uncomfortable." "I appreciate that," Adelaide said, though a reckless part of her wanted to throw caution to the wind entirely. "But I think we can do a little more than just sitting in separate chairs." They ended up on the fur rug in front of the fire, wrapped in each other's arms, talking and kissing until the storm outside began to quiet, and the first light of dawn painted the snow-covered windows pink and gold. Adelaide had never felt so content, so perfectly at ease in another person's presence. Fletcher held her like she was something miraculous, his strong arms a haven she had not known she needed. In the days that followed, their relationship shifted and settled into a new pattern. They still worked together, still maintained their daily routines, but now there was affection woven through everything they did. Fletcher would kiss Adelaide's temple as he passed her while she was sewing. She would lean against him while they sat by the fire in the evenings, his arm around her shoulders and her head on his chest. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams and fears with the kind of honesty that only comes when two people truly trust each other. Christmas came and went, a quiet celebration marked by the exchange of simple gifts. Adelaide had made Fletcher a new shirt from fabric she had found in a trunk, carefully embroidering his initials on the collar. He had carved her a set of beautiful wooden combs for her hair, the handles decorated with delicate flowers that must have taken hours to create. They cooked a special meal with their hoarded supplies, and Fletcher produced a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. They toasted to new beginnings and second chances, and Adelaide thought she had never been happier in her entire life. As winter began its slow retreat, and the days grew incrementally longer, Adelaide and Fletcher talked about the future. He wanted her to stay, not as hired help but as his partner in building a life on the mountain. She agreed without hesitation, unable to imagine returning to the harsh uncertainty of town life when she had found peace and love in this unlikely place. "We should get married," Fletcher said one evening in late February. They were sitting on the porch, wrapped in blankets and watching the sun set behind the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "I know it is fast, but out here time moves differently." "I do not need years to know what I want, Adelaide. I want you for as long as you will have me." Adelaide turned to look at him, studying the face that had become so dear to her. "Are you sure? I do not come with much. No dowry, no connections, no family to speak of. Just me and my stubborn pride." "Your stubborn pride is one of my favorite things about you," Fletcher said with a smile. "And I do not care about dowries or connections. I care about you, about the way you hum while you sew and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I care about the future we could build together, the life we could make. So yes, I am sure. I have never been more sure of anything." "Then yes," Adelaide said, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Yes, I will marry you, Fletcher Ashford." They rode down to Deeming as soon as the trails were passable, the early March sun warming their backs as they descended from the mountains. The town looked exactly as Adelaide remembered it, though she felt like a completely different person from the desperate, frightened girl who had tried to steal bread just 4 months earlier. She walked down the main street with her head high, Fletcher at her side, and felt nothing but pity for the woman she had been. The circuit preacher was due to arrive in a few days, and they made arrangements with Mrs. Garcia, who was delighted by the news of their engagement and insisted on hosting a small celebration after the ceremony. The boarding house proprietor had clearly guessed something of the sort might happen when Fletcher had asked after Adelaide months before, and she clucked over them like a proud hen, determined to make their wedding day special despite the limited resources available. Mrs. Henderson at the general store was considerably less enthusiastic, though she grudgingly sold them supplies and even offered stiff congratulations when Fletcher made a point of mentioning their upcoming nuptials. Adelaide saw the disapproval in the older woman's eyes, but found she did not care. She had Fletcher's love and respect, and that was worth more than the good opinion of every busybody in New Mexico territory. They were married on a bright Thursday morning, Adelaide wearing a simple blue dress that Mrs. Garcia had helped her alter to fit better, and Fletcher in his new shirt with his hair freshly trimmed. The ceremony was brief, attended by Mrs. Garcia and a few other townsfolk who had come to wish them well, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Fletcher kissed Adelaide with such genuine joy that everyone applauded. The celebration afterward was modest but heartfelt, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the afternoon. Adelaide danced with her new husband, marveling at the way her life had transformed. 6 months ago she had been alone and terrified, certain her future held nothing but misery. Now she was Mrs. Fletcher Ashford, wife to a good man and partner in a life that promised challenge and hardship, but also love and belonging. They spent their wedding night at Mrs. Garcia's boarding house, in the same room where Adelaide had stayed that fateful night after Fletcher first rescued her. Being together as man and wife was both exciting and natural, a physical expression of the emotional intimacy they had been building for months. Fletcher was patient and tender, making sure Adelaide felt cherished and desired, and she gave herself to him with complete trust and growing passion. In the morning, they packed their supplies and began the journey back to the mountain, back to the cabin that was now truly their home. The ride seemed shorter this time, or perhaps Adelaide was simply more focused on the man beside her than on the trail itself. They talked about plans for expanding the cabin, maybe adding a room or two as their family grew. The assumption that there would be children someday, a future stretching out before them full of possibility, made Adelaide's heart swell with happiness. Spring arrived in earnest, painting the mountain in shades of green and gold. Adelaide planted a garden in the clearing beside the cabin, vegetables and herbs that would supplement their diet and give her a project to tend through the warmer months. Fletcher taught her to fish in the nearby streams and how to identify edible plants in the forest. She taught him to make bread that did not resemble rocks and how to organize his trapping supplies so he could actually find what he needed. They worked side by side through the days and fell into each other's arms each night, building a partnership that was equal parts practical necessity and profound devotion. Adelaide had never imagined she could be this happy, that life could be this good. There were still hard days, times when supplies ran low or the weather turned fierce, but they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. Summer brought longer days and the chance to explore more of the mountain. Fletcher took Adelaide to his favorite spots, hidden meadows full of wildflowers and crystal-clear lakes that reflected the sky like mirrors. They would pack a lunch and spend hours away from the cabin, talking and laughing and making love in the dappled sunlight beneath the pines. Adelaide learned to shoot a rifle with surprising accuracy, pleased to be able to contribute to their hunting efforts, and Fletcher taught her to track game through the forest with patience and cunning. In August, Adelaide realized her monthly courses had not come, and she suspected she might be pregnant. She waited another month to be sure before telling Fletcher, wanting to be certain before raising his hopes. When she finally shared the news one evening over supper, he nearly dropped his plate in shock and excitement. "A baby," he repeated, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby, in late winter, I think. Maybe February or March." Adelaide watched his face, seeing the joy and wonder and slight hint of fear that flickered across his features. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Fletcher set down his plate and pulled Adelaide into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I am terrified and thrilled and more happy than I knew was possible. A baby, our baby. God, Adelaide, you have given me everything." "We have given each other everything," she corrected, pressing a kiss to his jaw. "I love you, Fletcher, I love you too, so damn much." The pregnancy progressed without complication, though Adelaide grew increasingly uncomfortable as her belly swelled, and the baby made its presence known with frequent kicks and movements. Fletcher was endlessly solicitous, bringing her water and cushions, rubbing her aching back, and reading to her in the evenings from the few books they owned. He made a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and lining it with soft furs. And Adelaide sewed tiny clothes from scraps of fabric, marveling at how small a newborn baby would be. They made the trip down to Deeming in December, wanting to be closer to town in case anything went wrong with the birth. Mrs. Garcia welcomed them with open arms and insisted they stay with her for as long as needed. The boarding house proprietor had delivered several babies in her time and promised she would help when Adelaide's time came. The baby, a healthy boy with a powerful set of lungs and his father's gray eyes, arrived on a snowy night in late February. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Adelaide was certain she could not continue, but Fletcher stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. When their son finally made his appearance, squalling his displeasure at the cold world he had entered, Adelaide looked at Fletcher's awestruck expression and knew their family was complete in a way she had never experienced before. They named him Thomas, after the man who had saved Fletcher all those years ago, and the new father held his son with such careful reverence that Adelaide felt tears stream down her face. This was what she had lost when her own parents died, this sense of belonging and unconditional love. And now she had found it again, in a mountain man who had saved her from jail and given her a reason to believe in second chances. They returned to the cabin when Thomas was a month old, riding slowly and carefully with the baby bundled in a sling against Adelaide's chest. The mountain welcomed them home with clear skies and the first hints of spring, and Adelaide felt her heart settle into place as they crested the final rise and saw their cabin nestled among the pines. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by the ordinary miracles of daily life. Thomas grew strong and sturdy, with his father's quiet strength and his mother's stubborn determination. 2 more children followed, a daughter named Sarah and another boy they called James, and the cabin expanded to accommodate the growing family. Fletcher built additions and Adelaide filled them with love and laughter, creating a home that was warm and welcoming even in the harshest winter. Adelaide never forgot where she had come from or the desperate circumstances that had brought her to Fletcher. When they made their occasional trips to Deeming for supplies, she would sometimes see other women in situations similar to what hers had been, and she made a point of offering help where she could. A meal, a few coins, a kind word, whatever small assistance might make a difference. Fletcher supported her completely in these efforts, understanding better than most what it meant to be shown kindness when you needed it most. The children grew and thrived, learning to hunt and fish and survive in the mountains under their father's patient instruction. They learned to read and write from their mother, who was determined they would have the education she had struggled to obtain. The cabin became a place of warmth and security, a haven from the harsh world beyond the mountain, and Adelaide would often pause in her work to marvel at the life she and Fletcher had built together. On their 10th anniversary, they sat on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains, watching their children play in the clearing. Thomas was teaching his younger siblings how to skip stones in the stream, his voice carrying on the evening air, and Adelaide leaned against Fletcher's solid warmth with a contentment that went bone deep. "You ever regret it?" Fletcher asked, his arm around her shoulders. Taking a chance on a strange mountain man and his isolated cabin. Adelaide turned to look at her husband, seeing the silver that was starting to thread through his dark hair and the lines that years of sun and wind had etched around his eyes. He was as handsome to her now as he had been that first day in the general store, maybe more so because she knew every facet of the good man beneath the rugged exterior. "Never," she said firmly. "You saved my life that day, Fletcher, not just from jail, but from a future of loneliness and despair. You gave me love and purpose and a family. How could I ever regret that? I think we saved each other, Fletcher replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. I was just existing before you came along, going through the motions. You made me remember what it means to truly live. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, and the stars began to emerge one by one in the vast expanse of sky above them. Adelaide thought about the frightened girl who had tried to steal bread to keep from starving and the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about all the small choices and random chances that had aligned to bring her and Fletcher together, and she whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever benevolent force had been watching over her that day. As the years continued to pass, Adelaide and Fletcher grew older together, their love deepening with each shared sunrise and every challenge overcome. They saw their children grow into capable adults who carried the lessons of mountain life forward into their own futures. Thomas became a skilled tracker and hunter, eventually taking over much of the trap line work from his aging father. Sarah proved to have a gift for healing, learning to use mountain plants and herbs to treat various ailments, and James showed an unexpected talent for carving, creating beautiful objects from wood that people in Deeming paid good money to own. There were hard times, of course. A bad winter when they nearly ran out of supplies. The year, Sarah fell through thin ice and nearly died from the cold before Fletcher pulled her out. The summer of drought when the garden withered and game became scarce. But they weathered every storm together. The family Fletcher and Adelaide had created standing strong against whatever hardships the mountain threw at them. On Adelaide's 40th birthday, Fletcher gave her a journal bound in soft leather, the pages blank and waiting to be filled. "I want you to write our story," he said, "so our grandchildren and their children after them will know how we found each other. So they will understand that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best ones if we are brave enough to take the chances offered to us." Adelaide spent countless evenings filling those pages, chronicling the journey from desperate theft to enduring love. She wrote about the shame of being caught, the miracle of Fletcher's intervention, the slow building of trust and affection that had bloomed into something beautiful and lasting. She wrote about their children and the life they had built together on the mountain. And she wrote with gratitude for every single day she had been given as Fletcher's wife. When Thomas married a girl from Deeming and brought her to meet his parents, Adelaide saw something of her younger self in the nervous bride. She took the girl aside and told her about the loaf of bread and the mountain man who had paid for it, about how the worst day of her life had been the beginning of her greatest happiness. "Things have a way of working out," Adelaide said, squeezing the young woman's hand. "Not always in the way we expect, but in the way we need. Be patient with Thomas and with yourself, and you will build something worth having." More grandchildren came, filling the cabin and the clearing with noise and laughter. Fletcher built a larger table to accommodate family meals, and Adelaide sewed quilts for each new baby, determined that every child would know the warmth of a loving home. The mountain that had once seemed so isolated became a gathering place, a touchstone for a growing family that looked to Fletcher and Adelaide as the foundation upon which everything else was built. As Fletcher moved into his 60s, his pace slowed and his joints ached on cold mornings, but his love for Adelaide never wavered. He still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world, still reached for her hand when they sat together in the evenings, still kissed her good night with the tenderness of a young man courting his sweetheart. Adelaide treasured every moment, knowing that nothing lasted forever, but determined to savor what time they had. They celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and a community of friends who had come to respect the couple who had carved out a life in the mountains against all odds. There were toasts and speeches, and when it was Fletcher's turn to speak, he stood with Adelaide's hand in his and looked around at the faces of everyone they loved. 30 years ago, I walked into a general store in Deeming and found a young woman trying to steal bread because she was starving, he began, his voice strong despite his age. I could have walked past, could have minded my own business. But something told me to help, and it was the best decision I ever made. Adelaide gave me a reason to live rather than just survive. She gave me children and grandchildren and more love than any man deserves. So here is to her, and to taking chances on strangers, and to the power of a single act of kindness to change everything. Adelaide stood and kissed her husband to thunderous applause, and in that moment, she felt the perfect symmetry of her life. She had started with nothing and been given everything. She had been saved and had learned to save herself. She had found love in the most unexpected place and had let it transform her into someone strong and capable and deeply, endlessly grateful. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and Fletcher and Adelaide grew old together on their mountain. They watched the world change from their isolated perch, hearing news from their children about railroads expanding and territories becoming states, about inventions and innovations that were reshaping the West they had known. But their life remained largely untouched by such progress, rooted in the timeless rhythms of nature and family. When Fletcher's health began to fail in his 70th year, Adelaide nursed him with the same fierce devotion he had shown her throughout their marriage. She sat by his bedside, holding his hand and reading to him from the journal she had written, reminding him of all they had shared and accomplished. Their children and grandchildren came to say goodbye, filling the cabin one last time with the love that Fletcher and Adelaide had created from nothing but hope and courage. "I would do it all again," Fletcher whispered to Adelaide one night when they were alone, his voice thin but certain. "Every moment, every hardship, every joy, all of it just to have you by my side." "We will meet again," Adelaide promised, tears streaming down her face. "This is not the end, Fletcher. It cannot be. Our love is too strong to be confined to just one lifetime." He smiled, and Adelaide saw a glimpse of the younger man he had been, vital and strong and utterly hers. "I will find you," he said. "However long it takes, whatever I have to do, I will find you again." Fletcher Ashford died peacefully on a spring morning, surrounded by family, leaving behind a legacy of love and decency that would echo through generations. Adelaide grieved as only someone who has lost their other half can grieve, but she did not break. She had learned too much strength from the man she had loved to crumble now. She lived another 5 years, watching her grandchildren grow and welcoming great-grandchildren into the world. She maintained the cabin with help from her sons, refusing to leave the mountain that had been her home for so many years. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch and talk to Fletcher as if he were still beside her, telling him about the family's news and the changes she witnessed. When Adelaide's time came, it was gentle and without fear. She lay in the bed she had shared with Fletcher for decades, surrounded by the children who had been her greatest joy, and she closed her eyes with a smile on her face. Her last words were simple and heartfelt. "I am coming, my love. Wait for me." The journal Adelaide had written was passed down through the family, becoming a treasured heirloom that told the story of two people who had saved each other against all odds. Future generations would read about the shopkeeper who had accused a desperate young woman of stealing bread, and the mountain man who had paid for it and bought her a week's worth more. They would learn about the love that had blossomed from that single act of kindness, and they would understand that sometimes the most important moments of our lives happen when we least expect them. The cabin stood for many years after Adelaide's death, maintained by descendants who recognized its significance. It became a symbol of enduring love and second chances, a reminder that even in the harshest environments, beauty and tenderness can flourish if given the chance to grow. Visitors would come to see the place where Fletcher and Adelaide had built their life together, and they would leave moved by the simple power of a story that proved love could conquer even the most desperate circumstances. In the end, what remained was not wealth or fame or grand achievements, but something far more valuable: the memory of two people who had found each other when they needed it most, who had built a life of purpose and meaning from the ashes of their individual struggles. Fletcher had saved Adelaide from jail and starvation, but she had saved him from a lifetime of loneliness and isolation. Together, they had created something that transcended their own existence, a legacy of love that would inspire everyone who heard their story. The mountain still stands, its pine forests whispering secrets to the wind, and if you listen carefully on quiet evenings, some say you can still hear the echo of laughter from the cabin in the clearing. It is the sound of children playing, of a woman humming as she works, of a man chopping wood with steady strokes. It is the sound of a life well lived and a love that refused to be forgotten. And somewhere in the vastness of whatever comes after, Fletcher and Adelaide found each other again, just as he had promised. They walked together through fields of wildflowers that never wilt, beneath skies that never darken, and their hands are clasped tight as they were on that first day when a desperate woman tried to steal bread, and a mountain man paid for it, forever changing the course of both their lives. Their story became more than just words on a page or memories shared around a fire. It became proof that kindness matters, that love endures, and that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually the beginning of our greatest blessings.